Good day, this is Jove Aguas, and welcome to my lectures in philosophy. This lecture is part of my lectures in Existentialism and Phenomenology. And for this lecture, I will be focusing on the philosophy of the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. So let's start with an introduction. Mordecai Martin Buber was a Jewish existentialist philosopher. He was born on February 8, 1878 in Vienna. He was brought up in the Jewish tradition by his grandparents. In his early childhood, he lived with his parents in a house over the Danube River. At 3 years old, however, the serenity of his childhood was disrupted when his mother literally disappeared without leaving a trace, and this broke the home of his childhood. He was sent to Lvov to live with his grandparents. Solomon Buber, his grandfather, was an eminent scholar who passed to his grandson Martin interest in Jewish scriptures and philology. His grandmother, Adele Buber, is a cultivated and self-educated lady who was well versed in Jewish and German literature. Karl Buber, his father, was a wholly sentimental man from whom Martin learned the importance of interhuman dialogue, the sense of active, responsible contact that could arise to full reciprocity. In his brief autobiography entitled Meeting, Martin Buber remembered two images from his childhood that remained with him all throughout his entire life. First is the memory of the house in Vienna where he spent the first 3 years of his life. And second, the tragic recollection of his parents' separation, which happened when he was 3 years old. When she asked the girl who was looking after him about his mother, the girl answered, "She will never come back." To this early experience of this meeting, he attributed the lifelong preoccupation with the nature of human mutuality. Martin Buber's grandfather, Solomon Buber, and his grandmother, Adele, lived in a house in a large estate near Lvov, then the capital of Galicia. Adele Buber did not send Buber or Martin Buber to school until he was 10 years old. Instead, he had him taught by private tutors about humanism and languages. Buber's favorite language as a child was Greek, and his philosophical education was established, in particular, of a thorough reading of Plato in Greek. At a young age, he could speak German, Hebrew, Yiddish, Polish, English, French, and Italian. In addition to this, he could read Spanish, Latin, Greek, and Dutch. Buber spent his first year of university studies in Vienna, the city of his birth and his early childhood. In Vienna, he found a unique culture, a mixture of German, Jewish, and Slavic influences. While he was studying in Vienna, he adopted the Viennese style of writing and speaking. During his first year as a student at the University of Vienna, Buber occupied himself with literature, the history of art, and philosophy. In the winter semester of 1897 and 1898, he studied at the University of Leipzig, and in the summer of 1899, he studied at the University of Zurich. In Leipzig and Zurich, he attended lectures in philosophy, history of art and literature, psychiatry, Germanics, classical philosophy, and even national economy. He attended the lectures of the Austrian physicist and philosopher Ernst Mach, the German philologist Wilhelm Wundt, and the German psychologist and philosopher Karl Stumpf. As a student, he was particularly oriented to the natural science and was enthusiastic about psychiatric clinic. He studied the philosophy of Nietzsche, Kant, and Neo-Kantian philosophy being the accepted and predominant philosophical system at the time. He was influenced by the existential thought of the early years of his life. The more prominent existentialist philosophers are Kierkegaard, with whom he partly agreed to the idea of the single one; Nietzsche, whose emphasis on the concrete and wholeness of being enriched his thought; and Phenomenology, which is emphasis on time and on the personal standpoint in observing personal experience. In 1900, Martin Buber was appointed editor of Die Welt, the official organ of the Zionist movement. And in 1903, he founded, together with James Weissman, another journal, the Jove. Throughout his life, he continued to promote an understanding among Jews of the richness of their cultural heritage. He urged Jews not to identify Zionism with purely political goals. And in 1904, he encountered the writings of Baal Shem Tov, one of the first Hasidist storytellers. Later, Buber decided to withdraw from Zionism because of some conflict with the leadership. He broke up with the group and contracted or concentrated on the study of Hasidism, devoting 5 years in studying and translating the Hasidist texts. In 1923, his most famous work, I and Thou, was published, and in 1925, he was appointed to a lectureship in Jewish religious philosophy at the University of Frankfurt. In 1927, he visited Palestine. From 1928 to 1938, he wrote another book considered to be a sequel to his first book, I and Thou. The second book is entitled Between Man and Man. Because of his Jewish blood, Buber experienced and endured the violence of the Nazis' anti-human regime. He experienced the most violent upheavals and changes, including the two world wars and the intense revolution in thought and technology. In the 1930s, Buber experienced the hardship of every Jew, or that every Jew experienced under the Nazi regime. In 1938, he accepted the chair of social philosophy at the Hebrew University, and in March of the same year, sailed to Palestine together with his wife Paula. In Palestine, Buber started his personal campaign against terrorist methods being used in Palestine. At the same time, he continued to voice his concern at the plight of the Jews in Nazi occupied territories. He called on his fellow Jews to regard the Arabs as their partners. Upon his retirement from the Hebrew University in 1948, he started a series of lecture tours in the United States and Europe. This greatly extended his influence in philosophy and education. When he returned, he was awarded an honorary doctorate by the Hebrew University. In his final years, Martin Buber suffered periodically from ill health. He contracted chronic nephritis in 1961, and 2 years later underwent a surgery for cataract problems. His nephritis developed uremic poisoning. Buber died on June 13, 1965, at his home in Talbieh, and was buried at the Jewish cemetery in Jerusalem. Now let's discuss his philosophical influences. At a young age, Martin Buber was already concerned with a lot of questions which perpetuated or which perplexed him no end. And at the age of 14, He was already under the influence of Nietzsche and Kant. This influence was not only intellectual, it was deeply involved in the young Buber's personal existence. At a very young age, he was so absorbed by the problem of infinity of space and time that he had thought of ending his life because of the crisis he had with it. With his readings of Kant, he was helped out of this crisis. And although Kant's prolegomena to all future metaphysics was intended not for pupils, he dared read it. Through it, he came to the view that space and time are nothing more than formal conditions of our sensory faculty, not real properties that adhere to things in themselves, but mere forms of our sensory perception, the formal conditions by which we grasp the world of phenomena. According to Buber, Kant's philosophy exercised a quieting effect on me and presented at the time a philosophical freedom. At this moment, there appeared to Buber the intuition of eternity, an intuition that even at the end of his life he held as the most remarkable achievement of man. Eternity is not endless time, it is being as such, which is beyond the reach of all the finitude and infinity of space and time. With this, he got the glimpse of the possibility of a connection between man and the eternal. This foreshadowed his dialogue with the eternal Tao. But this rationalistic insight offered to him by Kant was overshadowed by Nietzsche, with his most impassioned yet least philosophical book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which Buber began translating into Polish. Nietzsche's book, with its grandly willed and splendidly expressed philosophy, took possession of him. I quote, I say, took possession of me. For here a teaching did not simply and calmly confront me, but a willed and splendidly able utterance stormed up to me and over me. That's Martin Buber. Nietzsche offered a dynamism and a creative flow of life that held the young Buber in thrall throughout the period of his earliest writings. The influence upon him of Nietzsche, especially Nietzsche's view of time as an eternal return, had kept him from a very different view of time and eternity. Time for Nietzsche was not an endless line stretched out into the infinite, like what had tormented him few years ago. It was an infinite and essentially circular sequence of finite periods of time, which are like one another in everything, so that the edge or the end of the stage of the period goes over into its new beginning. There's no escaping these finite periods of time, and the only alternative is to live one's life, affirm one's life within this eternal return. But although the young Buber was indeed a passionate Nietzschean, the mature Buber would later dismiss Nietzsche's conception of time, which Nietzsche considered as the most abysmal teaching or no teaching at all. Buber's deeply rooted religious ways and thought also found enrichment in the philosophy of Nietzsche. The dynamism of Nietzsche's philosophy, with its concern for creativity and greatness, and its emphasis on the concrete, actual, and wholeness of being, did enrich Buber's thought. So while Kant's influence on him foreshadowed Buber's later dialogue with the eternal Tao, the influence of Nietzsche set him on the long road that led up to it. Now, Buber, as a Jew, or Jew by descent, absorbed the interest and mystical life and piety of the Jewish tradition, particularly Hasidism. He first encountered Hasidism in his childhood days. Buber recalled that every summer his father, Karl Buber, would take him to their estate in Bukovina to a nearby village of Sadagora, the real or the seat of the dynasty of the Zadikim. However, it was his grandfather, Solomon Buber, whom we have said a Hebrew scholar, who taught him the religious wisdom of this doctrine. As a child, Martin Buber recalled, and I quote, I had received an image of the Zadik, and through the solid reality had glimpsed the pure idea, the idea of the genuine leader of a genuine community. End of quote. Buber devoted the 5 years of his life and immersed himself into the study of the texts and teachings of this tradition. And this he did by retiring from his public life, a decision that gave him a unique personal direction from which, even in the most terrible crisis, he was never deflected. The Hasidist traditions was the chief formative influence in his life. It appealed to him because of its emphasis on joy, love, meetings, and relation with God and fellow man, the present hour, prayer, and true self. The Hasidist redemption lays in devout works, loving deed, fervent prayer, and a single hearted devotion to God and to man in the common life. God's glory can be found in all things, and man must live a life of holiness, joy, and purity in this world. Buber stressed that Hasidism does not mean a turning away from one's fellow man and from the world in order to be totally devoted to God. It is not after private mysticism, but a communal mysticism of love and prayer. It is after the establishment of a true community founded and based on brotherly love and interpersonal relationship among its members. Another influence in the life and career and thought of Buber were Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky. Together with Nietzsche, these are the three most important intellectual and spiritual masters for Buber. They are, by his own account, meant most to him, but his intellectual relation had been many-sided and complex, as we have discussed. Now, with Kierkegaard, Buber found the importance of direct relation between God and the individual, who must constantly risk all in the concrete uniqueness of its new situation, and in this process emerge as a genuine person, a person before going out to relate with others. He stood firmly with Kierkegaard, where Kierkegaard's insistence on being a single one and refusing to be absorbed or to be swallowed up in the crowd out of his own subjectivism and into the life of trust. The single one is the person who is finding himself. Buber agreed with Kierkegaard that man realizes the image of God through having become a single one. To become a single one is to fulfill the first condition of religiosity, all of religiosity. The single one corresponds to God. Man can have dealings with God only as a single one. With Kierkegaard's single one, Buber came up with his own understanding of the single one. The goal of the single one is to enter into a relation with the real person, and for the real person, he is able to have a complete relation of his life to the other self. Buber clarified that Kierkegaard's to become a single one is not meant Socratically. It is not intended to be the right life, but entry into relation. Buber, however, refused to limit the self to itself and with God. As against Kierkegaard, who insisted that man should essentially speak only with God and himself, Buber stressed that the fundamental relation is triadic: relation with the self, with God, and with fellow man. Thus, he refuted Kierkegaard's stand that the relationship of the single one is exclusive only to oneself and to God. Because for Martin Buber, relation can be with oneself, with God, and with fellow man. He pointed out that the real relationship with God cannot be achieved on earth if real relation with the world and mankind is lacking. But then relationship with other human beings is possible only in terms of real relationship with God. He referred to Jesus in the Bible who, when asked about the greatest commandment, answered that we should love God with all our hearts, with all our minds, and with all our souls, and we should love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Now let's go to the character of Buberian thought. First, first character could be that his thought or his entire philosophy is focused on the dialogical and the relational. Man is a being in relation. As man is capable, he must enter into a living relationship with others. Man is better understood in the realm of the between. He said, only man with man provides a full image. It is entering into relation that makes man really man. Second, that this relation is grounded on dialogue. The idea of relation is based on the notion of dialogue. In dialogic meeting, man becomes and transcends himself. It is in virtue of its dialogical character that human life touches upon absoluteness and acquires an absolute meaning that overpasses its own conditioned nature. Relation, as we have mentioned, is triadic. The dialogic is not limited to man and fellow man. It is not only between man and man, it is also between man and God. So the fundamental relation is triadic. It means relation with the self, with God, and the other. Next is that authentic human existence is living a dialogic life. Authentic existence is dialogic. The two types of relationship into which man or human beings can enter is the I-it and the I-thou. The human beings possess twofold attitude towards the world, indicated by the two primary words that he speaks. And in the I and thou, he identified these primary words as I-it, I-thou. The first type of attitude, Buber terms the I-it relationship, is characterized by objectification and control of nature and people. The I, which is the self, in this relationship seeks to acquire and possess as much as it can and perceives itself as a being, an individual, who is not over who is set over and against the subjects of its perception. There is an authentic way or a deeper way of relating to the world, which Buber called the I thou relationship. So in this is the place in the I thou where people come together and encounter one another on the deepest possible, on the deepest level possible. He said, "The Tao meets me through grace, and is not found by seeking, but by my speaking of the primary word thou to it is an act of my being, is indeed the act of my being. The I thou is a meeting not only of minds, but of souls, of wills, of that which resides at the core of one's being. When you say thou to another person, you are sharing the mystery of your being. You are responding with the totality of the self to the thou who is addressing you. You are meeting one another on the level of the spirit." Those are words of Martin Buber. Next, his thought is religious. The dialogical man is a religious man, and vice versa. Buber's philosophy falls under religious existentialism. He sees man as essentially oriented to God, whom he called the eternal Tao. He sees life as a summon and sending. Every man has his unique being as a gift from God, and it is his responsibility to realize it in its own wholeness. Man's relation with God is one of dialogue. The religious man commits his whole life, his whole being, in God's dialogue with the world, and stands firm on this dialogue. He said, God made no tool for himself. He needs none. He created for himself a partner in the dialogue of time. End of quote. And again, he said, in this dialogue, God speaks to every man through the life which he gives him again and again. Therefore, man can only answer God with the whole of his life, the way in which he lives this given life. The basis for all statement about faith is dialogical relation of trust, not the belief in the dogmatic contents. So, he said, again, I quote, one can believe that God is and live in his back. He who trusts him lives in his face. Trust is probing trust, is the fulfillment of life in spite of the experienced course of the world. End of quote. Now, religious faith does not result from the mindless recitation of religious formulas or from the adherence to an unintelligible liturgical routines, but from the total commitment of one's being and one's life to the eternal Tao. There is no statement about God which does not at the same time state something about man. For Buber, the biblical history of belief of Israel is a living tradition, a dialogical history between God and man, from calling out Abraham out of his environment, the covenant at Mount Sinai, up to the prophets, a dialogical history which demands everyone who joins it. God, the absolute person, becomes person to meet man in supreme meeting. In dialogue, man turns to God, and this turning is nothing less than our redemption in God, the eternal God, the absolute person. By turning towards God, we enter into a life altering relationship. We receive the presence of God as power, as gift, as revelation. Our lives becomes laden with meaning, a meaning which, while heavy to bear, is nonetheless real, palpable, reassuring. And neither synagogue, nor church, nor mosque, nor university can determine what this meaning is for us. Thus, the meaning of my life in the context of my meeting with God is specific to the circumstances of my life. It gives us the strength and courage to confront the problem of our lives, of our communities, of our world. When we enter into relation with God, we perceive we are responsible for those whom we consider to be strangers, even enemies. The man or woman who has turned to God has abolished moral judgment forever. The evil man is simply one who is commended to him or her for greater responsibility, one even more needy of love. Another character of his thought is that his philosophy is an affirmation of relation and community. He rejected atomistic individualism and totalitarian collectivism. He affirmed true community. For him, only men who are capable of truly saying thou to one another can truly say we with one another. Thus, Buberian philosophy is an affirmation of the uniqueness and wholeness of man. He affirmed the totality of man, the wholeness and uniqueness of the subject man or the human person. Another aspect of his philosophy is his tremendous respect for human dignity, for the dignity of the human person. He believes that truth, meaning, and redemption are found in solidarity with other people. Buber demands authenticity, authenticity in our relationship with one another, in our relationship with God. His ideas point the way towards such authenticity. These are not prescriptions. He does not provide a formula or an incantation for possessing God. He challenges us to live, to establish meaningful relationship, to hear God amidst the din of the world. Now, let's go to the next topic, the notion of dialogue. Buber is known for his philosophy of dialogue. His notion of dialogue has been applied in religion, psychology, psychiatry, education, social sciences, and in many other branches of knowledge and in many aspects of human life. It is one core concept that stands out more than any of his other ideas. Has a very unique understanding of dialogue. He wrote, and I quote him, "For a conversation, no sound is necessary, not even a gesture." End of quote. There is a conversation or a kind of dialogue which happens outside the confines of speech and gestures. And again, I quote him, "The life of dialogue may dispense with speech and communication, but it has as its minimum constitution one thing, mutuality of inner action." In his book, Between Man and Man, Buber talked about three ways of perceiving a man living before our eyes, or the man that we encounter. First is the perception of an observer. The observer is wholly intent on fixing the observed man in his mind or on noting him. He fixes his attention on the traits, the gesture, the expressions of the man in front of him. The second way of perceiving is that of the onlooker. The onlooker is not at all intent. He takes up a position which let him see the other as an object. He sees the object freely and awaits what will be presented to him. He pays attention not to the traits, but to existence. Now, the observer and the onlooker regard a man before them as an object separated from themselves and their personal life. This, the man that they observe or the man that they perceive, is nothing but an object separated from them, who just happen to be in front of them. And then the third one, Buber said, there is the moment when a man meets man about whom there is nothing I cannot grasp in any objective way, not in any objective way at all, that says something to me. He speaks something that enters my own life. The saying is a real speech, real, one that reaches my inner being. This man is not my object. This man is attached to my life, to myself. Now, this is a perceiving which Buber called becoming aware. But becoming aware of what? It's becoming aware of the presence of a person, not an object, a person who stands before me. And from this becoming aware, a genuine relation can blossom. Now, he also speaks of three kinds of dialogue. The first one is technical dialogue. Technical dialogue is prompted solely by the need of objective understanding. So, like for example, in a conference or in a talk show, or when somebody is explaining how to operate something, there is technical dialogue. The whole purpose is to understand what is being said, to understand the instruction. The second is monologue, disguised as dialogue. Here, one is never aware of the other as something that is absolutely not himself, at the same time, something at which he nevertheless communicates. So I pretend or I enter into a conversation with this person or with the person before me, but I am only concerned about myself. There seems to be a conversation, but I am more concerned with what I am going to say, not what he's going to say. I'm more concerned with my own interests, with my own ideas, not about his ideas, not about his thoughts. The third one is genuine dialogue. And genuine dialogue can either be spoken or be in silence. But in genuine dialogue, each participant really has in mind the other or others in their present and particular being. And I turn to them with the intention of establishing a living mutual relation between me and them. That is genuine dialogue. So the concern of the person is the other as a person. And if this dialogue becomes mutual and reciprocal, then there is the reciprocity of the recognition of the presence of each other. Now, in genuine dialogue, there is always that sense of reciprocity. In monologue, it is always confined in the self, even in the most intimate relations. In monologue, the focus is always the self, the interest of the self, the good of the self. So the contrast between monologue and genuine dialogue must not be confused with the contrast between egoism and altruism. Here are people who are absorbed in social activity, but never spoken from being to being with a fellow man. A person may be altruistic in the sense that he regards the other or he respects the other, or at least listen to the other. But he is not really absorbed. He does not really recognize the uniqueness, the presence of the other. The basic movement of the dialogue is turning to the other, recognizing the presence of the other, not observing him, not just noting his personal existence, but to really turn and recognize the presence of the other. Not to focus on his qualities or traits. Because once we focus on the traits, on the qualities of the other, then we reduce the other to an object. If one looks at someone and addresses the other, one turns to him, of course, with the body, but also with the requisite measure with the soul, in that one directs his attention, all his attention to him. The basic movement, however, of monologue is not turning away as opposed to turning towards, but reflection. Because it would seem that in monologue we turn away from the other. But according to Buber, the turning is not really a turning away, but a kind of reflection. And reflection here means that one, the direction returns to the self. Reflection is different from egoism or egotism. It is not that man is concerned with himself and considers and enjoys and idolizes himself. It is when man withdraws from accepting with his essential being another person in his particularity. He lets the other exist only as his own experience, only as a part of oneself. In this kind of situation, any dialogue becomes fiction. So when we say reflection, it is really the movement of moving towards the other, but the other is only considered as part of oneself. The other does not exist as a separate subject or a separate being, but just as a part of oneself. That's where reflection happens. It points to the self. It goes out and returns to the self. That's why it's called reflection, going back to the self. The self seemingly turns to the other, but considers the other just a part of the self and then returns to the self. It becomes self referential. Now let's go to the next topic, the realm of the between. Between. The fundamental fact of human existence, according to Buber, is man with man. And one particular characteristic of the human world is that something takes place between one being and another. There's always that sphere or the realm of the between man and another man. According to Buber, there is that sphere or realm which is established with the existence of man as man. This is where the third alternative, according to Buber, must begin. Because the two other alternatives are individualism, and collectivism. The realm of the between establishes the third alternative of human relation, the between man and man. He said, in real conversation, one that is direct and spontaneous. In real lesson, for example, in a connection or communication or in a conversation that develops in mutual surprises, in real embrace, and in real duel, in all these activities, in all these encounters, what is essential according to Buber does not take place in each of the participants. Rather, it takes place between them in the most precise sense. So that the encounter cannot be divided equally between the two participants. Because there is something that happens between them that cannot be divided equally. And that experience happened in the realm of the between. So if I and another comes up against each other, meaning I and another person interact with each other, there's always that remainder between us. There's something common that remains that cannot be divided equally between us. The totality of the interaction cannot be exactly divided because of that remainder. And that is what is essential according to Buber. This fact exists even in the tiniest and most transient events, barely enter into our consciousness. In a handshake, in a real talk, real conversation, in a real encounter, even in a fight, there's always something that is between the two participants that cannot be equally divided between them. In that precise moment of encounter, in that precise moment of a handshake, in that precise moment of a conversation, there is the realm of the between. This reality, the reality of the between, provides the starting point for the genuine philosophical philosophy and anthropology. The central subject of the science of philosophy is man with man. The essence of man, according to Buber, which is special to him, can only be known in living relation. I and thou exist because man exists, and I, moreover, exist only through its relation to the thou. If we consider the individual by himself, then we see a man just as much as we see the moon. And if we see or consider the collectivity in itself, then we see a man just as much as we see the Milky Way. Only man with man can provide a full image. Only man with man is a completely outlined form. Consider man with man and we see human life, dynamic. It's twofold, the giver and the receiver. He who does and he who endures. A attacking and defending force. The request begged and granted. And always both together, completing one another and mutual contribution. Together, showing forth what man is. So, what is man according to Buber? So, let's focus now on man as a subject in relation. Man is not just a being in the world for Buber, he is also a being with others. He is a being in relation. Man should not be distinguished from object, or man should be distinguished from objects. He is a unique subject. And this is one central theme in the philosophy of Buber. His entire dialogical philosophy is anchored on the value of the person as it is as distinguished from things and from objects. The person who is able to stand in relation with others. Man for Buber is not a being in isolation, but a being in relation. So Buber defines man as that being who is able to have a complete relation with God, with nature, and with his fellow human beings. Man is able to have an authentic and meaningful existence only through his living relation with others. This relation, according to Buber, as we have mentioned, is triadic: self, God, and other. In virtue of this nature, of his nature and his situation, man has a threefold living relation. He can bring his nature and his situation to full reality in his life if all his living relations become essential to him. So, as we have said, man's living relation is first his relation to the world and to things, and his relation to men, both the individual and the collective or the many. And third, his relation to the mystery of being, to God, which is dimly apparent throughout all his life, but infinitely transcends it. For the philosopher, he is considered to be the absolute, but for the believer, he is God. Now, Buber stressed that man exists anthropologically, not in his isolation, but in his completeness, in the completeness of his relation between man, between man and God, and between with himself. Humanity is fully grasped in man, in relation with what humanity is, and can be grasped only in vital reciprocity. Man should not be conceived as an individual isolated from his fellow man, or as a member of a conglomerate, or as just a member of a collectivity wherein his uniqueness fades away and is engulfed by the general will of the whole. Man exists not in isolation nor in collectivity, but in the completeness of his living relation with others. Man's existence, therefore, is actuated, it is fulfilled, it is realized through relation. He lives a meaningful life, has an authentic existence through his living relation with his fellow human beings. As we have said, the existentialists have focused their attention on authentic existence. They have always urged man to give meaning to his existence. They have always asked whether our life is meaningful or not. They have always, however, they are not one in saying how we can attain authentic existence. What's important for them, of course, is the question rather than the answer. And the answer of Buber as to how we can have authentic existence and meaningful life is to enter into a genuine dialogue or genuine relation with others, with God. Now, let's talk about the two types of relation that Buber discussed in his book I and Thou. And these relations are the I-it and the I-thou relations. So, in that book, he distinguished two fundamental types of relation which he expressed in the now famous I-it and I-thou. These fundamental types of relations are based on what he regards, or Buber regards, as the primary attitudes of man. And these primary attitudes are expressed in the primary words that man speaks. When Buber says speaks or speaking, it's not just uttering words. To speak is to live. You live what you speak of. So when I speak these primary words of I, it, and I, thou, it signifies my life, my way of living, how I treat other people. Now, according to Buber, these primary words do not simply or do not signify things, they signify relations. The I, it, and the I, thou are the basic relations which we can enter into. And since man is a being in relation, the I of man comes into being in the act of speaking one of these words. And these primary words are the I, it, and the I, thou. And again, as we have mentioned, to speak is not just to utter a word, but to stand in relation or to enter into a relation with a fellow man or with an object. So first, let's talk about the word, the primary words of I, it, and I, thou. The real determinant of the primary word in which man takes his stand is not the object or the subject, which is in front of man, but the way he relates himself to that particular object or subject. This refers to the kind of relation which one establishes towards the other. So the I, it, and I, thou is not so much about whether the other is an object or a subject, because one becomes object or subject depending on one's attitude towards the other. So the type of relation which one establishes with the others or the other is not determined by the object or subject of that relation, but the kind of attitude one has towards the other. So the primary word I, thou can only be spoken with a whole being. Again, to speak is to relate. So when I speak the I, thou, that means I speak or I relate with the other with my entire being. The other primary word can never be spoken with the entire being or with his whole being. The I, it is spoken not with his entire being. And in that I, it relation, the attitude towards the other is to regard the other as an object. Now, in the I, thou relation, man enters with his whole being and takes his stand in it. He enters into that relation as a total, genuine person. He does not have any guise or pretension about the relation. He does not have any interior motive, but a desire to establish an honest, a, a sincere relationship, to establish an honest to goodness relationship, an interpersonal relation with the other. In the I, it relation, however, man enters not with his whole being. That is, his, his relation, the relation, is not based on an honest to goodness relationship. His purpose in that relation is not relation itself. He may have other motives. Interpersonal relationship is only secondary to those other motives. So while in the I, thou, my attitude towards the other is that he is a person, And my real intention is to establish genuine relationship with him or with her. In the I it relation, my attitude is defined by a different intention, a different motive. And my attitude towards the other is not that the other is a subject, but an object that I can manipulate or use to satisfy my motive or to serve my interest. The man in the idol, therefore, has no thing for an object. He does not consider the other as an object. If the I enters into that relation, it does not have any object but a subject. What is an object? An object is something that one can perceive, something which one is sensible of, something which one imagines, something that is willed and felt, something that is thought of. So the object can be the object of thought, the object of feeling, the object of one's intention. But in the I thou relation, it is not a relation of man to object. The person in the I thou does not have an object to perceive, to imagine, to feel, or to think of. He has somebody, a fellow man, towards whom he stands in relation. This and all others, Buber said, belongs to the world of it. And so when the Tao is spoken, the speaker has nothing. He has indeed nothing, but he takes his stand in relation. The Tao establishes the world of relation. In the I Thou relation, that relation is direct, mutual. There's no foreknowledge, no system of ideas, no fancy intervene between the I and the Tao. In this relation, there is no aim, no anticipation, no lust, no desire. The I Thou establishes the world of mutual relation. The I and Thou mutually affects each other. Buber said, my Thou affects me as I affect my Thou. Between the I and the Thou, there is mutual giving. There is mutual sharing of selves. I give myself to my Thou, and he in turn gives himself to me. I lend my ears to him in attention, and he likewise lends his ears to me in attention. My Thou may not give me something material, something that will sustain me in life, but he teaches me to meet others and to relate with others. He helps me see the other life. In the world of I Thou, one may not offer me anything material, may not give me something that I will need or that something that will sustain me in this earthly life. For unlike the it does not teach me how to use or manipulate others. On the contrary, it teaches me how to meet and relate with others. It certainly helps me to see the other life. The it, of course, sustains me. So in the I it, we perceive what exists around us simply as things, beings as things, and what happens around us simply as events, things consisting of qualities, events of moments, things entered in the graph of place and events in that of time. To man, this world is an ordered, detached, and reliable world, having density and duration. It is organized and is always there next to him. It is his object, and will remain to be an object as long as he wishes it to be. He can take it, and it lets itself be taken by him. But then it does not give itself to him. He can hold on to the it for his life, and it will sustain him. But then he cannot meet others in it. So the it sets the world as a world of experience. The I, it signifies a relation which is person to thing, subject to object. It involves some forms of utilization, manipulation, objectification, control, and domination. Persons in this world are not persons but objects, things, tools, instruments. In life, the man who takes advantage of his neighbor or his employee or his acquaintance reduces the other person to a mere object. The I, it is the primary word of experiencing and using. It is entirely lacking in directness and mutuality. Whether in feeling or in knowing or in acting, it is the typical subject to object relationship. It is always mediated, always indirect. It's always dealing with others only in terms of categories and qualities. The I, it is significant only in connection and differentiation, but not in relation. Now, the I thou, on the other hand, signifies a relation which is person to person, subject to object, subject to subject. It's a relation where there is acceptance, there is sincerity, concern, dialogue, and care. It is characterized by mutuality, directness, presentness, and intensity. And to connect these two, the I it and the I thou, Buber says, in all, and I quote him, in all seriousness of truth, hear this, without it, meaning the it, man cannot live. But he who lives with it alone is not a man. So that means we need the it to sustain us. We need the world of it for us to survive. But to be a man, we need the doubt. Now, let's go to the social dimension of intersubjective relations. According to Buber, there are two dimensions of intersubjective relations, the social dimension and the interhuman or the interpersonal dimension. The interhuman is signified by the I thou relation. The other dimension, the social, is signified by the essential we relation. So that's I thou and we relation. First, the we relation. If there is the thou, there's also the we. What corresponds to the essential thou on the level of self being in relation to a host of men, to many men, Buber calls this the essential we. There are many, multitude. The person who is merely an object to me is not a thou, but a he or a she. In the same manner, the faceless and nameless crowd in which I am entangled is not a we, but a they. The they. The we is a community of several independent persons who have reached self and self responsibility. The community resting on the basis of the self and self responsibility, a being made possible by them. The we can arise in every kind of group, Its essential character is the essential relation that exists among the members, no matter if it is only temporary. What is essential is the genuine communion among the members, the openness of one another, and when the members set aside their differences to work for a common goal or common good. In its structure, it includes the potential Tao relation, because in that community, a personal relationship may develop between or among the members. But the moment any one of the members uses others or the other for his own interest, this is enough to prevent the essential we from going or from growing further. The we relation belongs to the realm of the social dimension. Through it, although it includes the potential thou, it cannot be regarded as interhuman. Men live with one another, they are bound together, bring in its train of shared experiences and reactions. But to live together and be bound up only means that each individual's existence is contained and enclosed in a group existence. There's, of course, a feeling of belongingness, just like in any association or organization, but it may lack the personal relationship that the Tao has. So, the interhuman, the realm of the interhuman, and this is a different realm from the social. It was Buber who first conceived the notion of the interhuman. He noted that it is usual to always consider or ascribe to the social realm whatever happens and takes place between man and another man without really understanding the other important area of our life, that is the interhuman. So he acknowledged falling also into this same error, and from then on realized that there is a necessity of drawing the line between the essentially the essential, uh, the different areas of our human life. And so, for Buber, aside from the social, we must have a separate category of our existence, and that is the realm of the interhuman. The realm of the interhuman goes beyond living and sharing experiences together, something that is characteristic of the we relation. It goes beyond belonging to a particular group. In the interhuman, there is a personal relation that exists among the members of the group, not simply sympathy or not simply cooperation, but a real sharing of selves. The essential thing is that each of us regard each other as a person, unique in our own way, as partners in every event of our life. Now, in the sphere of the interhuman, the participation of both partners is indispensable. That is, that the partners confront each other. By confront, meaning one stands in front of the other, communicates, relates with the other. There must not be any form of utilization or objectification or control or manipulation. Because if such acts creeps into the relation, then such relation ceases to be an I thou. It becomes an I it relation. Buber regarded the life of dialogue as the mutual sharing of our inner selves in the realm of the interhuman. So he distinguished it from tactical dialogue, the one that we have mentioned earlier in this discussion, which is prompted solely by the need of objective understanding. It is also different from monologue disguised as uh, dialogue. There must be a genuine dialogue, and genuine dialogue has the sole intention of establishing a living mutual relation between or among the participants. But before we can establish a life of dialogue, we must first have a kind of perception, which Buber called becoming aware. And this becoming aware, as we have discussed earlier, means the recognition of the presence, of the existence of a person in front of us. This is when I perceive man not in an objective way, but I understand that he is addressing and saying something to me, something that enters my being. So this man that says something to me is not my object. I perceive him not as a thing, but as a man, as a person, and I am concerned about him. This is what Buber termed becoming aware. Now, dialogue that is genuine dialogue then is possible when two are mutually aware of each other's presence, and that both avoid objectification and manipulation. We must always be aware of that man confronting us as person, not as object. Buber said the limits of the possibility of dialogue are the limits of our awareness. Buber, however, admitted that it is common for man or to man to be an object of observation. And to be observer, on the other hand, is always a possibility. But because we are human beings, we are able to impose limits to our objectification. And only as a partner can man be perceived as an existing wholeness. Now let's go to the elements of the interhuman. According to Buber, genuine dialogue, as the sharing of ourselves in the interhuman, can only unfold through what he called the elements of the interhuman, and by avoiding the essential problems of the dialogue. In his book, Knowledge of Man, Buber identified or listed three elements of the interhuman. And these are being, personal making present, and unfolding. First, being. According to Buber, the essential problem of the sphere of dialogue of the between is the duality of being and seeming. He distinguished between two types of existence. First, the one that proceeds from what one really is, and the other from what one wishes to seem. He pointed out that some people are too much concerned about the appearance and the impression that they make upon others. So they produce masks, they produce looks and appearances to conceal their real selves. They tend to pretend that they are this or that person, but in reality they are not. They tend to project an image that they want or wish to impress upon their audience and not their true selves. That's seeming. So for Buber, these people live in the world of seeming. But there are also those who are entirely independent of the impression that they make on other people. They do not pretend. They do not wear false appearances. They do not put impressions or masks just to present to their audience or partners the real selves. The one they really are, they just present the one they really are. So they are honest and sincere about themselves. In a word, they live in the light of truth. So Buber differentiated how these two kinds of people deal and relate with others. Definitely the one who lives in the world of being or in the light of truth deals with the other in a spontaneous way, without reserve, because he is honest and sincere about the relation. He's not masking or hiding anything about himself. So he looks at the other just as one looks at somebody with whom he is acquainted with or has personal dealing. Of course, he wanted to be understood by the other. But he's not concerned by the thought of the image that he can project or impress upon the other. The one who lives in the world of seeming, on the other hand, since he is concerned about the image that his appearance produces on the other, he makes his own look. He's worried about the image that he projects. So, seeming, Buber pointed out, is a threat to a genuine dialogue. And if dialogue between persons is mingled with and by seeming appearances and impressions, then the very existence of relation and dialogue is threatened by these seeming appearances. And these seeming appearances could ruin a harmonious and honest relation. Therefore, adherence to truth is essential to the establishment of authentic and honest personal relation, establishment of a genuine dialogue. Truth means that we communicate to the other the one we really are, and that we present to the other our real being. We must not allow any seeming creep into our relation with others. According to Buber, to yield to seeming is man's essential cowardice. To resist it is essential courage. The next is personal making present. Another important element or presupposition for Buber so that genuine dialogue could rise and could be established is the affirmation of the other as a person and as a unique and distinct subject. The acceptance of the person over against me as the bearer of his personal belief, of his ideas, of his conviction, even though I may sometimes disagree with him. It is only in this manner that I can address him as a partner in a genuine and authentic dialogue. So I must at certain points offer opposition to the other's belief and personal conviction. But what is essential according to Buber is that I accept this person with whom I struggle, with whom I disagree, as his partner. I may oppose his conviction, but I must affirm him as a person. This is the true meaning of confirmation, that I confirm my partner as this existing unique being, even while I oppose him and his conviction. It is true, Buber noted, that it now depends on the other whether genuine dialogue can arise between us. But I must trust him and suppose that he is also ready to deal with me as his partner. But before I can confirm the person confronting me, I must be first be aware of him who is over and against me. And to be aware of something is to experience it as a whole without reduction or obstruction, without manipulation or objectification. That I become aware of his presence. But to define this awareness of man in this general fashion and sense is to categorize him with the other being. So when I categorize, I become aware of the person as an object. To be aware of man in its strict sense is to experience him as a whole person, as a unique being, as a bearer of thoughts, of beliefs or convictions, as a person gifted by spirit. To perceive this person as a dynamic center, a unique person, a bearer of his thoughts and intentions. However, this awareness is impossible if the other as my partner remains to be the object of my contemplation and observation, or the object of my categorization. For the wholeness of man can never be known by contemplation or by categorization or observation or objectification. It is impossible unless I enter into a personal relation with him, unless he becomes personally present to me. And making the other person present means imagining the real. It means imagine quite concretely what the other thinks, what the other person is wishing, what the other person is feeling, what the other person is perceiving. That's imagining the real. That's making the other personally present to me. So, in this, the realm of this genuine imagining, is the particular real person, me as a real person, who steps out to meet and confront the other. I can attempt to make him present to myself just in this way and not otherwise. His wholeness, the unity and uniqueness, and with his dynamic center. So, this making present enables me to experience the other side of the relationship, without losing anything of my own reality, and to live through the common event from the standpoint of the other. Buber admit that this attitude of confirmation may be unanswered, and the possibility of the dialogue may die. But if there is mutuality, if mutuality would exist between us, then the interhuman blossoms into a genuine dialogue. The third element is imposition and unfolding, or the third element is unfolding, and the opposite of unfolding is imposition. For Buber, there are two basic ways of affecting men and their views and attitudes about life. There are two ways of influencing others, and these are imposition and unfolding. When one imposes oneself on the other, one tries to force the other, or force and impress to the other his opinions, his ideas, his own point of view, in such a way that the other feels that the result of his actions came out because of that influence. The second is termed by Buber as unfolding. Here, man wishes to find and to further in the soul of the other the disposition toward what he recognized for him as the right. The other man has his own potentialities. The other has his own potentialities that he needs to recognize. So what I do is to become an agent in the process of becoming. The other has his own ideas, his own opinions, his own point of view, but have not realized those potentialities, and they need to be actualized. So what I do as a partner is to help him unfold those potentials or those possibilities. So for the proper existence of the interhuman, it's necessary that the semblance, meaning the seeming, not intervene to spoil the relationship, the genuine relationship. And it is further necessary that each one means and makes the other present, meaning make the other person present to himself, and that neither wish to impose oneself on the other. So those are the elements of the interhuman, and these are the ideas of Buber about dialogue, interhuman, and interpersonal relationship. Thank you very much for listening, and this is Joe Aguas.